I want to welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Grosso, and I'm an Associate Director here at the CTE. And our presenter is Dr. Laura Lamika Anderson. Wait, I always get it backwards.
Lamika Anderson, that's fine.
And she is going to share with us about how she used Twitter. And you probably already know this, but just in case you don't, she was given knighthood by the French government. Is that correct? Okay, that's impressive. So in honor of that, I made cream puffs, so you have to have cream puffs, okay? But I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I always enjoy talking about Twitter. And please do try a cream puff. I have one saved for later, so I'm very excited about trying one. So we're going to talk a little bit about Twitter today, and if you have questions as they come up, please feel free to ask. I don't know that I'm an expert on Twitter, but I've been using it for about 3 years. Started, I guess, with my students 3 years ago in the fall, using it for the very first time. Really didn't know what I was doing at all, and have learned a lot since. But just to kind of open things up today, do you use Twitter? Do your students use Twitter? Any thoughts on that? Any of you using Twitter right now? Yeah? Classes, professionally, or more?
A little of both.
Little of both, okay. And you're using it too?
Yes, just personally.
Okay, yeah.
Professionally, more personal learning networks.
Yeah, okay. Okay, good. So the most recent statistics I found that Twitter has 175 million users today, which seems like a lot for Twitter. And they're getting about 230 million tweets a day, which has been a 110% increase since January, which shows us that more and more people seem to be jumping in. However, when we think about that 175 million users, Twitter also has published that the 100 million are active users of that amount. And by active, they mean are logging on to Twitter once a month. And that's kind of vague. When they say they're logging on, they could be, you know, just looking at what's going on, kind of lurking around there, or they could actually be tweeting, you know, every day, maybe once a week, once a month. We don't really know. So the statistics, even though they're out there, they're still a little vague. We don't know exactly what's going on. But nonetheless, I thought it was interesting to share and kind of start out that way. I think that in the time that we have together today, I'll just start out by kind of going over some of the basics. I know that some of you here haven't used Twitter before, and kind of like to start with that, just kind of an introduction to what it is. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I've been doing with Twitter, and then give you some ideas that might work for something that you're interested in the classroom. So we'll see how that goes, and maybe have a little time to discuss some of your ideas at the end. So kind of starting out in a very general sense, what is microblogging? Microblogging is a type of blogging that's very brief, that allows one to post very brief text updates of less than 200 characters. And then publish them, and then they can be viewed by anyone or by a restricted group. So when we think of Twitter, we're thinking of kind of in a more general sense, microblogging. Some popular microblogging tools that exist, and you'll see Twitter is among them, but you have other things like I Rate My Day, Mood Mill, that is kind of like how are you feeling on a certain day. So there are lots of ways that and different tools that you can use to do microblogging, so these brief updates. And interesting things about microblogging in general is that it's kind of appealing to people because it's easy to use, it's spontaneous, it's very immediate, and it's portable. Okay, so those are some of the things that really appeal. And it allows also to deliver data to interested users over a variety of channels. So you could be receiving these on your cell phone, through Facebook using a third-party application, through email, through an RSS feed, or on your computer. So those kind of things make microblogging interesting. A little bit of a background on Twitter itself. Twitter is one example of a microblogging tool, and it's a social networking and microblogging service that allows users to send and read messages known as tweets. Okay, and you can restrict that delivery to people in kind of a circle of friends, or by default allow open access. But really, basically, it's just a way of connecting, whether it's going to be with friends, family, professionally. However, you're answering whenever you log into Twitter or go onto Twitter, you see this question pop up, what's happening? Okay, so you're kind of putting something, some text in that responds to that question of what's happening. What does it look like? So this is my Twitter page here that I just did a screenshot of to give you an idea of what's going on. You see the what's happening question up there. So let's see if we can get this working here. All right, the what's happening question. This is the little box that allows you to type in your text. It gives over here the number of tweets that you've made. It gives you the people who are following you, your followers, people that you're following. And then it gives a variety of things, trends going on, what's in the, thank you, that helps a little bit, in the United States. And then up here at the very top, it has a search function, so you can use this to search. A home page is kind of where you see all of the updates from everyone that you're following come up. Your profile, where you're able to see everything that you have posted. Messages, there's kind of a private emailing, they call it a direct message service, where you can send a private note to someone else and some suggestions of who to follow. So what you see on this page, you basically have your timeline. So you can see, that person happened to post 8 minutes ago, 18 minutes ago, 22 minutes ago, and it kind of goes down as to what's going on, who's responding to these questions at a particular time. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these in just a minute. You see an @mention, a retweet, searches, list. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But this is just kind of an overview of what it looks like when you would log in once you're set up. And it's very easy to go in and just create an account. I ask my students to do that every year before they come to class during the first week of class, and then we talk about it a little bit once we're together and what they can do with it. So starting out with some basic functions, a tweet. We brought that up a little bit earlier. It's a post or a status update of 140 characters or less. Now that's very, very short. And this can be a good thing, or this can be a not so good thing. It kind of depends. I've had students say they really like it because it's short. It doesn't require a lot of them. It's not like writing, for me, I teach French, so it's not like writing a paragraph in French or a whole composition in French. It's a very short way. But on the other hand, some of them tell me it's not really enough it's not long enough to express my ideas. So, that can go either way. It could be good or not so good. Here's just a couple of examples. I pulled these from some of my students last week as I was preparing this. You can see, kind of to give you an idea of the length of what they're producing, and what kind of thing. I did one in French and one in English. The one in French says, I want to go out to a party tonight because it's the birthday of one of my roommates. Okay, so they're just kind of sharing about what's going on, the student in his life on that particular day. And the next one, it was called Skyping with the French students today. So that gives you an idea of what they look like. A hashtag, some more terminology. It's kind of that little thing with the pound sign and what follows it. I require my students, if we go back to this slide, to use a hashtag, and you'll see that we use the same hashtag that I came up with, # RDE09, which stands for the name of my project that I'm working on. But this gives you some more examples here. Why I use a hashtag is because I can go up into that search feature that I pointed out earlier on my on the profile page, or on my page in Twitter, and I can search for that particular hashtag and very quickly pull up all of my students' tweets. Because I'm following a lot more people than just my students. I have a lot of messages coming up, but if I want to do a really quick search for what's going on in my class, I'll sometimes just type in that hashtag and see what's going on and then respond to students very quickly that way. So it enables me to do a quick search for the tweets that are related to my students in my class. So that's a hashtag. Another thing that you might hear is a retweet. And those are when you're reposting another user's message and you want to share that with the people that you are connected with. And I have typically not done a whole lot with retweets in my classes, but this year I decided to offer that as extra credit. And I have a lot of students that are posting a retweet as for extra credit. And I told them that it has to be something that's related to France or the French-speaking world. So what I see a lot coming up are news stories, which is very interesting because I don't always have time to go and see what's happening in the news with France or Francophone countries. So my students are kind of doing this work for me, which is fun, and they're sharing it. And then I'll go click on the links and I'll go and read and make a comment about that, and that will spur other discussion. So I kind of learned from my mistakes. I didn't really talk about retweets at all at the very beginning when I started using Twitter, and probably because I didn't know a whole lot about them 3 years ago. But as I've learned more by being involved in Twitter, I like the idea of doing this, and I found a way to do this that's effective for my students in sharing information with each other.
So these are tweets that they read someplace else and then they posted them with this hashtag to the students in the class?
It's possible that they're connected through other followers and they're finding interesting stories that they happen to read, and then they retweet them. It could also be some interesting post that someone else makes about something, and someone could retweet that. It's as simple as that. But for the purposes of my class, I have them do something that's somehow connected to France or the French-speaking world.
Excuse me, for the benefit of the newbies,
Yes.
the hashtag, is
Yes.
that just something that you type in when you type your message?
Exactly, and that counts as some of your 140 characters. So you have to consider that, especially if you're putting on a couple, like we see here, a couple of different hashtags. That all counts as part of your 140 character limit, so you got to figure that in. And the hashtags are interesting. They could mean something, or the person who is tweeting could actually make up some hashtag, that may not be part of some other group. But if there's other people, let's say, often I see this come up if I'm at conferences. People will tweet with the hashtag of the conference name. And so it's an easy way to go and get everyone kind of on the same page, see what's going on. They'll say ahead of time, they'll send out a message and say, let's all tweet at this conference and here's the hashtag. So they'll set up something just for the purpose of that particular conference. So here you can see one of the hashtags up here, FL Teach, is a group of people who all talk about foreign language teaching. And so they're all going to tweet with that hashtag if it pertains to that group, and then they can go back and search for the tweets that are interesting for that particular group. Yeah.
I guess you need a half step back. So
Yeah.
I understand the retweet is for extra credit, but what's the actual assignment you're having your students do?
Oh,
Maybe
we'll
you're
get
getting
to that. We'll
okay.
get to that. Trying to cover some basics
Okay.
first, and just to review basic terminology, we have the tweet, which is the actual message. It has to be 140 characters or less. If we add that hashtag in there, it's going to count into the 140 characters, but it's a way to help search for a particular topic or to get a group on the same page kind of tweeting together. Okay, and then we talked about retweets very briefly, and that's just retweeting what someone else has posted or said, and something you want to share with your followers. Okay, so something you think is interesting or important and you think your group would enjoy hearing about that, so you retweet it. And let's see, there's one last thing. Oh, mentions. At mentions, another terminology word, which in your update, it contains a username of someone else in the body of that tweet. So in this particular one, we see my username, which is right here. And he was responding to a message I posted out about an article that I wanted them to read for class. So you see that come up there. So it could be that they mention someone directly. That he's not mentioning me directly in this particular one, but you could be asking a question and putting someone's name in there. Oh, I like this, as does so and so, So kind of retweeting you to bring you into that particular discussion, or just mentioning you because there's some link with a prior message or discussion that's been going on. So the mentions is just pulling someone's name with that @ symbol into the text that you have. Okay, or it could be simply replying, because when you reply to someone else's tweet, your @ and name will be in there. Okay, so that could be one of those two things. And then the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about very briefly is sharing ideas and how does this happen. A lot of people share things like, of course you can share text, but you can also share links and photos. And so I wanted to show you what this looks like. One of my students right here has kind of taken over the role of the class musician, and he loves to share very interesting music, French music, Francophone music that he finds. And so right here he's signaling everybody that this new single of someone he really likes has come out, and he's giving us a link on YouTube in case you want to go check it out. So that's what that looks like. And then he's sharing a picture on this particular tweet where he's just uploaded a picture and is sharing that. So you can also share videos and photos very easily in Twitter as well. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more now about just how Twitter can be beneficial in learning and teaching. Then I'm going to get a little bit into my project and answer your question and talk a little bit more about the specifics, and then kind of give you some more global ideas for using it in your classes. But when I think about using Twitter, some of the things that I think it does really well is, first one is building community. And that's been in some research recently on building community and supporting learning in the classroom. The next thing is creating a virtual extension of the physical classroom and fostering a sense of community, encouraging participation. And I've seen this as well. For me, it's worked very well, extending the class. So they come to me. My students come to me to learn French twice a week. That's not very long for learning a language. So this is a great way for us to extend that classroom outside and get them to continue practicing the language even when we're not meeting physically together. Impacting student engagement and grades. There have been some studies recently that have looked at that and shows that there has been some positive research on student engagement and higher grades, slightly higher grades. And then finally connecting classmates and instructor through Twitter. And I found this to be true for me as well. For me, it's been a great way just to really connect, kind of build community, and to get to know my students very quickly initially. So why do I use Twitter? First thing is to develop a sense of community. I like to do that very quickly in my class. I teach an intermediate French class here at the university, and we work with a partner class in France. And so when I first started using Twitter, the very first time 3 years ago, my goal was to connect those two classes together. And I thought, well, Twitter would be a fun new way of doing this. Well, it was a disaster. It didn't work. But I've learned a lot since, and have kind of changed my reasons for using Twitter. So first thing is to develop a sense of community, and I feel that most with my own students. I connect with them. When we first start using Twitter in class, I'm responding a lot to them. I take my phone to the gym. When I'm at the gym, I'm responding to Twitter messages. You know, every chance I get, I'm just on with them and trying to build that community initially. Second one is to extend language practice outside the classroom, and that kind of happens naturally because, you know, we're talking, we're using French outside of the classroom. We're not exclusive to French, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it does get them using language more outside of the classroom. Engaging students in their learning of French. So I find that with what we can do on Twitter, we're talking about everything and anything, movies, music, politics, you know, whatever happens to interest them, which we don't always get the chance to do in the classroom. In fact, we're usually glued to what's on, you know, our particular syllabus for that day. So this opens, conversation to a lot of different things, and the students I think they find that very engaging. And then to connect my students with students in France. Okay, and this is starting to work a little bit better. When I first started this 3 years ago, this was my primary goal, was to get my students connected to the students in France. Well, a couple of problems. First of all was that the students in France had no idea what Twitter was. And my students really just barely had an idea at that point what it was. Most of them were on it. Now when I introduce Twitter, a lot of them already have Twitter accounts. They're familiar with it. They've been using it. It's much easier. But at that point, they weren't. So we had maybe 1 or 2 students in France who were talking to us regularly. The other 14 just never really showed up. And so my students were really disappointed. But we've kind of changed our expectations since, and it's going a lot better for what I want to use it for. But anyway, I was telling you about it. I'm connected to a partner class in France. It's an engineering school that's right outside of Paris. And they're students who are learning English, and we're learning French. And so we try to use a variety of different tools. We use Twitter, we use Facebook, we use email, and we Skype usually once a week in the classroom together to kind of build our community. And then we end up taking trips over to visit them, and they come over to visit us. So I was thinking that Twitter would be a great way to get these communities going and build them very quickly so that we can, kind of build on that to do what we want to do in class. Continuing on. So my students are in their 4th semester of French. And what I ask them to do when we start Twitter is to tweet 3 times a week, which seems like a pretty reasonable amount. And, we think about these tweets as 140 characters or less. It's like writing a sentence, really. So it's not overly demanding on them. We usually go for about 9 weeks. In the semester, we have a few weeks off, sometimes vacation weeks. We take off. Sometimes the French students are on vacation, so I may not require them to tweet. And we don't start it immediately. We kind of work into it as we introduce technologies in the class. But 2 tweets are in the target language, that's TL. Okay, so I have 2 tweets in French that they're doing, and then 1 tweet in the native language, which is English. And the reason I have them doing both is because our partners in France are also learning. They're trying to learn English, we're trying to learn French, so we have some give and take. And I think the students really enjoy that too. It helps to build their confidence. They know that they can tweet in English as well, that it's not, that I'm not allowing them to do that. But they do have to make their tweets in French, and they make those in French, and then they can make more if they want. So the requirement is 3 tweets, 2 in French, 1 in English, and then they're required to use the hashtag as well. A lot of them start out the project and they forget the hashtag. So I tell them, well, it's very easy. You just go and delete that you copy the text from it, and then you go and delete it, and then paste the text into a new message and put the hashtag on, and you can fix it very quickly. So some of them do that, and some of them say, well, I just goofed up and I forgot to put it in, so I give them credit. But anyway, so again, they're tweeting 3 times a week. The tweets are representing status updates and current happenings in their lives. So what's going on? They're really responding to that question, what's happening? So that's how I'm using it in my class. And again, our goal is to build community, extend learning outside the classroom, and engage the students. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so this is kind of what it looks like. All right, I showed you some individual tweets before when we were talking about retweeting and mentions and things like that. But here we have kind of a series of posts, and sometimes their tweets can be very short. You see that is like 2 words. The first one, it's Monday, ... You probably know what that means. But the interesting thing about that is that leaving a post like that sometimes is a good way to get other people to respond. So they might share that feeling, or they might, add something about how their Monday is going. Second one, is this particular student is not feeling so well, going to the health center. Third one, I have to drive to Columbia and do my homework after my first class at 1:25. The week is beginning. All right. So, and then the last one is it's Monday, but it's also raining today. All right, so sometimes they're short, sometimes they're a little bit longer. But the interesting thing is I like to get them to talk about what's going on and hope that that will help them to interact with other people. So I mentioned before I require them to do 3 tweets a week, 2 in French, 1 in English. I give them extra credit for retweeting. I told you that already, if it's related to a French or Francophone. And I also give them extra credit if they reply to other people. Okay, so they might see one of these posts, let's see, this first one up here, you can see it's Monday. They might decide to hit this little reply key up here and add some sort of a response, and that gets them interacting with other people, which keeps them talking, which is a great thing because I want them to be producing as much language as they can. So they can reply, which is good, and if they do 5 replies, they get an extra credit point. So that kind of motivates them a little to do some replies. You'll see that they have the option here of retweeting as well, favoriting. I sent out a link last week about an article that I wanted them to think about before they came to class, and one of my students favorited that, so she has it kind of saved as a favorite of hers. And then you see the hashtag going on here as well. All right, so that gives you a better idea as to what it looks like. This is some data that I collected at the end of the year. I guess it was last year. And I just wanted to share it with you. Kind of what did the students actually think? So they've been through 2 semesters of tweeting, using Twitter as a tool. And it's interesting. Most of them are very positive about it. I have several of them who fall into that category, love it or like it. Neutral, so they could go either way. And then the do not like it. Pre-semester is the light blue, and post-semester is the dark blue, so beginning and end. So a lot of these do not like it actually ended up over here. We had one that stayed here and one that stayed here, one that actually hated it. And the one that hated it told me that he simply did not know what to say. He did not have anything to say. And you have students like that. I have a couple of students right now who never tweet. And I haven't been able, it's still early in the semester, I haven't been able to actually talk to them to find out why. But, and then I have other people who are tweeting like 20 times a week. So I have extremes in my class, and it's sometimes hard to figure out, what do I need to do? Do I need to do something differently? Do I need to throw out a question to get them tweeting? What is it that I can do to motivate those people who aren't tweeting quite as much or at all? So you have, most of the students I think generally fall into the categories of love it, like it, or neutral, and then you have a few that just don't like it. It's not their thing. And I think that's normal. I mean, that's the way we are. Some people just don't like Twitter at all. Some of the advantages of using Twitter, I ask my students about this as well, and I think what kind of comes in at the very top is using language with classmates outside of contact time. So again, that's helping to build community. They're talking to each other, they're finding out things about each other, they're sharing information, which is the second one. So they're really working on building that community without really knowing that's what they're doing. That's kind of my intention, but they don't really know that. They just, doing this because it's required, but then some of them really end up liking it and tweet a lot more than they have to. This is a few other statistics that I wanted to share with you, and I'll just point out from this a couple of things that are more interesting. Some of these that came in the highest were learning more in this class than in a traditional class. And I'm not saying that it's all due to tweeting, but I think tweeting helped them to be engaged in the content material and interested in finding out more about French and language and culture. A lot of them felt that through Twitter, their reading skills improved. They learned a lot from other tweets. A lot of them mentioned that they really liked the professor replying to tweets, and that increased their motivation, which I thought was really interesting. And that's one reason I really like to be engaged a lot with them when we start the project. And then another thing that came in very high was that they wished that the French students would have tweeted more often, and I'm still trying to work on that. It's very hard for me to control because I'm not over there with the French students in France. But this is the last kind of statistic I want to share with you, and this kind of gives you an idea as to how much they actually tweeted during a given semester. And they were required to make, over the 9 weeks, 27 tweets. And you'll see we're kind of all over the board here. We have one that's down at 22, so didn't actually make that requirement. But we have another one that's up at 90, one that's at 76, one that's at 69, so well over the required tweets. And I'm finding more and more, this is from I think last year, but as students are more and more familiar and use Twitter, even before they're part of my class, those are going to be your very active people who tweet a lot. And they kind of, for me, I found this year, they keep things rolling in the class even more than I do. Some of them are out there responding before I can even, you know, while I'm in class, or before I can even get a chance to respond. So that's actually quite exciting. So that's just an idea, to give you an idea of what they actually did and how much they produced. And I think this really speaks to how much they actually go over the requirement, which they didn't necessarily have to do. Although there was some extra credit offered, but this is going way, even, you know, the 90 tweets are going way beyond that. Yeah?
So how do you grade this?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll just go back to here, this slide for a minute. That's a great question, and I meant to talk about that. I like to involve the students as much as possible in their grading. So I have a little rubric that I've created that's kind of a self-assessment. And in the rubric is a little chart, and it asks them, did I tweet at least 2 times in French? Did I tweet 1 time in English? Did I make any replies to other people? Did I make any did I do any retweets? And did I kind of space out my tweets so they all didn't happen on Monday before class on Tuesday? So they go through and they self-assess, and they email their rubric to me. I look at their rubric. I'm on Twitter enough to know, you know, this person says they tweeted 5 times, but I don't remember seeing them. And if I have a question, I just go back and do my search for the hashtag RDE09 and actually see, or go back to their particular Twitter page and look at what their posts are. So I have them self-assess. I get that. I just check it over. It takes me about 3 seconds, and then I have their grade. So it's kind of an all or nothing grade, in that if they get the 2 tweets in French, 1 tweet in English, and they're spaced out, they get a 10 out of 10. If they're not spaced out, I take off points.
And like what percentage of the grade is that?
It's probably like 5 to 7% of the grade, I think. I have to go back and look at my syllabus to remember for sure. But I kind of lump my technology participation into one category. But there's something else I wanted to point out. Oh, sometimes what I see coming up as far as content, and you know, while this applies to French, it might be related to, you know, content of your subject area. I'll see mistakes come up in the language. You know, they're not using the right gender with nouns, or there's big glaring errors in their verb conjugations. And if there are things that really help, where we can't understand what they're trying to communicate, that kind of affect that, then I will go back and point them out to them. Not on Twitter. I don't really want to point them out in the public place, but I'll email them and say, hey, you know, when you're tweeting, remember, you know, this is how you should say that, or we would use a different word. You know, I'll have some people want to talk about spring break, and they'll use these really funny words to say it, talking about an actual break in like the Earth's surface in French. So, you know, I'll go and say, well, if you want to say this is here's how you would say it. And so, and sometimes when I get the French students on there, and I have some people who are actively involved, they'll actually offer those suggestions, and I won't even need to, which is even better. So another way to get those native speakers involved, and another reason for trying to get them engaged as well. But
have you been able to do any sort of an analysis of the number of tweets, the persons who with the highest number of tweets in correlation to their grade?
I haven't done that yet, but I'm thinking about that. That's a really good.
Just to see if
yeah.
there's a connection.
That's a good idea, and I'm thinking about doing something with that, because you know, it's interesting. The person who tweeted most was probably not my strongest student, but a good student. The person who did not tweet who only tweeted 22 times and the required was 27, probably ended up with a D or a C in the class. So, and my 2 problem students right now that aren't tweeting at all, both are failing my class. So, you know, there's probably, you know, just in thinking about it, there seems to be a link, but it would be great to actually run some tests that would show me that. So, that's a good idea. Any other questions before I move on? Yeah?
Can one tweet both by email and cell phone?
I usually use the computer. I'll go on and just log on to Twitter and email that way if I'm, or not email, but you tweet that way if I'm in my office. If I'm at the gym or on the go somewhere and I have a few free minutes, I will just use my phone and connect to Twitter that way. There's a Twitter app depending on what kind of phone you have. I have BlackBerry, but go on that way and do it. And we talk about that on the first day of class too, that you can do it that way. And a lot of the students do have plans now where they're able to connect to the internet on their phone and can use it that way. So, and that's a great thing about Twitter, that you can use it in a variety of ways. I saw a question.
What would be the largest number of students that you have in your class that you feel comfortable doing this?
My classes are usually 27 and lower. So I haven't experimented with larger classes other than being at conferences and tweeting with a whole bunch of people at the same time. And to me, it seems very chaotic if I'm the only one trying to sort through all of these messages. Have you tried it with a larger class?
No.
Okay. Do you teach a large class?
No.
No. Okay. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from someone who does teach a larger class and how that works. One of the ideas that I'm going to share with you in just a minute offers kind of is based on a person I think is based in Texas, and she uses Twitter as a way to kind of have students during class while they're there together to throw out comments and questions. But she has an assistant working with her while she's doing the lecturing. The assistant will be responding to those kinds of things as they come in a very large class. So she's using it in a different way. She's not using it to build community. She's using it to take questions, and that's a perfectly interesting way to use it. It's just different.
So she's actually allowing the Twitter to go on during the course of class?
Students have their devices out. It's a large class. They're tweeting as the class takes place, and they're tweeting about things that come up in the lecture, asking questions, making comments, and then there's a graduate assistant who's responding to all of those tweets as the professor is lecturing. It's an interesting idea. I haven't tried it, but for some people, especially for this person in Texas, it seems to be working well. So, okay, we'll keep moving on. Just to kind of summarize my project, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some ideas that might be useful for you to use. Some of the challenges, I already mentioned the retweeting. I wasn't doing this at all several years ago, and then I decided to open it up this year and kind of encourage my students to do a little bit more by offering extra credit, and it's working well. They're also sharing pictures and links. I didn't emphasize that prior to my class this year. I'm doing that now, and they're actually doing a lot of that. Following other tweeters should be required for class projects. If they're not following other people in my class, if my students aren't following the other people, they don't get the information that these people are sharing. So they're losing out on some of this. So one of the first grades that they get in my class is I make sure they're following everyone in the class, and that's a requirement. And it's kind of like an all or nothing grade, but I want to make sure that's happening so that they get everyone else's texts that are coming through Twitter. And then some love it, some hate it. I talked a little bit about that before, and I think that's just natural. That's kind of how we are. Some of us like it, some of us don't. Okay, so I wanted to kind of finish up by sharing a few ways that might be interesting that I've read about for using Twitter in the classroom. The first one is providing daily tips, and some of these might work well for your area of content. I haven't actually tried this, although I think I may, but it could be a word of the day, a definition, a keyword, a content-specific word. You could tweet a new question or a new word, and I thought it would be really fun for me to introduce some new French vocabulary word as a word of the day, and then maybe the students will start using that, or that could be, you know, a requirement for my students. You need to use this word in a sentence and see what they come up with. So it could be used in a different way, and that way would not be really linked to my goal of building community, but it would be of practicing language. Okay, so that's one idea. The second one is posting assignments or announcements, and that could be a place for students to ask anything about a particular assignment, which may just replace, you know, email if you're emailing them that information. But it gives opportunity for students to think about their learning outside of the class. The third one is a brainstorm session, which I think Twitter can be really good at if you're all there at the same time and you're just tweeting what your ideas about a particular topic. That could be interesting just to generate ideas as a learning experience, because you have all these ideas coming in at the same time. The fourth one would be asking questions without raising hands, and particularly for larger classes. Students may be overwhelmed by just the amount of people in there and be a little intimidated to ask questions. So Twitter could be used to kind of mediate discussions in class. Number 5 is Twitteries, which is kind of a fun name, and it's simply a creative writing technique where students could create a sentence to continue with the previous sentence to kind of build a story together. But they're limited to 140 words or less, so they have to be very creative about their sentence to add because they're so limited. But it sounds like a really fun idea, and I know I could see myself doing this in French too if we're working on a story together. You know, they each have to add on to what the previous sentence was and continue to generate ideas for a story until they come up with something interesting. So that's a Twittery. Connect with other classrooms. I mentioned earlier in my project that we're trying to connect with this class in France. That could be connecting with another course at another university where they're doing kind of the same thing. A way to enrich learning experiences for students. It could be with other schools, other professionals for that matter. Number 7, summing it up. So basically just asking students to read something and then posting a brief summary or some brief keywords from the story to see what they got out of the experience of reading that particular article. So a good way to sum it up, and they have to be very brief because again they have 140 characters or less that they have to do this in. Twit links, just sharing a hyperlink, something useful, an interesting site that they found. This could be good for collaborative research or revision. It could be a news story, content related. So just sharing a link that's pertinent to some content that you're doing in class. Another thing could be a micro meet where you hold discussions involving everyone who's in your class, everyone who's following. So you're kind of on at the same time, and it's kind of like a chat, okay, but it's happening in Twitter with your hashtag. And so then you can go back and search for that hashtag and kind of read over the whole discussion that's going on. Next thing is building community. So students can share what's going on in their lives with their classmates and teacher. Can I help the silent students to participate a little bit more with less risk involved than actually sharing in the classroom. Number 11 is posting a 140 character autobiography. So kind of another way to build community, but at the very beginning of class, have them try to figure out, you know, how they could use 140 characters to really say what they would say in an autobiography. So how they see themselves. Number 12, a scavenger hunt. These scavenger hunts could be something like a web quest or a series of clues that they get. I found an example of one. We're going to start a new unit of work next week. Have you guessed the artist yet? Clue number 6, he worked in a partnership with Brock, and then a hashtag. So allowing them to kind of navigate through some clues to go through a scavenger hunt. Number 13 is communicate with a professional. So maybe following a professional organization, and perhaps also engaging that group or person. So not just reading, but also trying to engage in communication, asking a question or throwing out some sort of response. Number 14, setting up a poll. Poll Daddy has a Twitter feature, for example, that could be used. So it could be for students in the class or for the broader microblogging community. Number 15, instant feedback and answering questions. And this kind of relates to that story I was conveying to you before about the teacher in Texas who gathers information from students as she is lecturing, and they use Twitter instead of raising their hands, and you know, can do something like that. I guess that's all I have. Questions? Any other questions, or anyone want to share any experiences? I know we're just about a few minutes short of the time I think that we have scheduled, but anyone interested in trying Twitter in any way? Or think of a way that you could use it in your particular class or setting?
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm in housing and I do assessment with housing, and we are right now doing a study with Twitter to measure engagement between learning communities. So we have our control group, those students who are not participating in Twitter, and then the learning community that is. We're having a hard time creating that discussion. And so I wanted to see if there were tips, because we can't hold over a grade or requirement. How can, any suggestions for how we can increase that discussion?
So you're just not getting people to tweet at all?
Our residential staff are throwing out questions. We're looking at the major and career exploration learning community. So it's like, hey, did you check out that speaker last night? And we're going to have an academic advisor come tweet one evening to try and engage that way. But we're kind of at a loss of how we can spur that.
It's tough to get it started. I would say you're going to have to offer some incentive to get it started. I think once you've built your community, it will take off. And that's what I found. If I didn't require my students to tweet, they wouldn't just get on there and tweet. So for me, it has to be part of the grade. Could you offer some sort of prizes, or free T-shirt, or something like that, or I don't know, a free food voucher? I think that initially might help, and other people are then going to spread the word. Hey, do you know what's going on this particular Twitter? They're offering free food, and you never know where it's going to go once you get people on there talking. But have you tried?
We've done incentives to get them to join the group.
Yeah.
Where
okay.
they're on it, but they're not.
Yeah. Well, they're on it. Yeah, but they have to be talking. Yeah.
So
that's.
We can take it another step.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to ask questions that are going to engage them too. And you might start out with questions that are really simple, that they could just, respond to very briefly, like yes or no. I saw something earlier, I can't remember what it was, but it was a question that was just this random question that someone posted, and it said, tweet if you check your, if you use your cell phone to check the time and don't own a watch. Just like crazy things like that. If you could come up with something that's interesting, that could get their attention, and then at the same time offer some prizes to help get them started, one would hope that once their community is built, they would keep talking and respond to you. But I don't know, for Twitter, I've found that you've got to be on it a lot and just keep at it consistently.
Have you thought about using a student too?
Yeah, that's another good idea.
Yeah, our resident mentors are charged with that, of putting stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. This is a great way to get students engaged, but I see a drawback in that it would take so much time for the professor to be answering all these tweets day and night.
Depending on how you use it, I make use of my, like I told you when I'm at the gym, I'm on the bike and I'm tweeting. So I'm using my time if my husband's driving me to work or something, I'm in the car using that, doing some tweets, catching up. And I do get into it a lot initially, and then once the students, like now, I probably check it once a day because my students are involved enough now that they keep it going without me. But initially, yes, it does take some time. But the other thing, the self-assess that I have them do, that cuts way back on my grading time as well, because I'm very conscious of the amount of time I can spend, because we do a lot with technology. Do you see something like that working, or could that?
Yeah.
Or even, start small, see how it works, see if your students seem to enjoy it, if you can find a way to use it that would fit your class and work well. Try it out and see what happens.
So do you make a commitment to them about how often you'll respond to
No.
them?
No.
They
I
have to
just
do
get
three,
out.
but you don't have to do anything.
Right, exactly. But I do. I always do.
Well, that's just wondering what their
Yeah.
expectations were. Is
Yeah.
They're like, well, I'm putting all these things up here and I never got anything back, so I'm just.
Yeah, I try to make a point initially to respond to all the students who post. In the first month of class, I'll be out there responding to everybody, and then I'll, pick interesting things and respond to some things, respond to some retweets, just kind of pick and choose. But I find that they respond enough that I don't really need to respond to everybody because they're out there doing it too. And so then I back off a little bit and kind of let them take over and do it.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you don't respond to every single one. I mean, every student,
No.
but not every tweet in the beginning.
Right. In the beginning, I try to respond to every student. So that might not mean every tweet that they make, but I try to respond to every student once during a week.
Okay.
That's kind of my goal. And I don't tell them that. I just try to do it. And I find that's a good way to get them motivated. They really like to get to know their teachers. They like to get to know who you are, what you do, how you spend your time. And so I'll tweet about things that I'm doing on the weekend. If I saw an interesting movie or a particular group that I like, I'll say, hey, check it out. Or if I saw a news story that's interesting, and some of them check it out, some of them don't. But, we just always see what happens, and you never know where that's going to go.
Have you thought about getting the different French classes at different levels talking to each other, or is that hard because of the language?
Yeah, I could see it going both ways. It would be, I think, motivating for students at beginning levels to talk to people at higher levels. I could see probably students at the same level talking together a lot more easily than mixing up the levels. But I think if we found another school somewhere else and they had a beginning or intermediate class, that would be interesting as well, or just in different sections. I think that could all work very well. I guess I've tried to opt for the native speaker connection because I feel like they can offer so much, but we're still working on trying to get that to.
It's sort of a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. So there's something in it for them. They want to learn English. We want to learn French. We want to learn about their culture. They want to learn about our culture. They're going to come visit us. We're going to go visit them. So let's talk. I don't know. We're going to keep working at it. So.